Hello and welcome to the Million Dollar Body Podcast with your host, Greg Fearon. And today I have the awesome Norma Pearson with me, who's going to help you feel like $1 million. How are you, Norma?
I am good. How are you, Greg?
Awesome. And do you want to just give people a little introduction as to who you are? Because we met like we talked about before during COVID times and stuff. So do you want to just give people an intro to who you are and how you got to where you are?
Sure. So there were some crazy times, weren't they? Um, so my name's Norma Pearson. I am by day a group fitness instructor. I have been a personal trainer as well, and I'm currently building up my business outside of the clubs and the leisure centres as a restorative movement coach. Coming really back full cycle to where I was as a PT, working with chronic pain management, injury rehab and movement retraining for performance, really sports performance, everyday performance. So I've been full-time fitness professional since 2011. So mostly working with group fitness classes, but my interest with back pain and pain, chronic pain in general, starts from my personal history with pain, having lived with pain for most of my life since I was about 10 years old, and my memories of back pain. And yeah, so my interest in pain has been a personal quest as well as a professional one to help my clients and the people that come to my classes and are looking for help and haven't found the answers that they're searching for.
Awesome. So I think this episode is going to help a lot of people because I think there's a lot of people who have niggles, pain, and they've probably tried physio, they tried chiropractors, they tried osteopaths, and it might go away for a short term, but it always seems to come back. So why does that happen?
Yeah, and I think this is a very common one. And like there are amazing physios, osteos, chiros, massage therapists out there that do great work. But there always seems to be a missing link between that sort of manual therapy, soft tissue therapy treatment, and then somebody getting back to their full function. And there's always been that, I don't think it's new, there's always been that missing link
Mm-hmm.
where people have struggled to make that jump from treatment back to fitness. And that's where I originally started, was being that missing link, and then it kind of grew from there. And I think what we need to recognize, and I've done like mentorship programs and courses with these therapists, so I have an understanding of how they're trained, which is similar to how you and I were trained, biomechanical, structural,
Mm-hmm.
looking at the body as a series of joints
Mm-hmm.
and muscles as mechanical movers. And that's how we're all trained. We're trained that this joint does this movement, and that if someone reports pain in a knee joint, then you do a muscle test, you do a range of movement test, and you come up with that a range of movement or that muscle being strong or weak.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like a lot of these therapists will just go to someone who says, I've got knee pain. So they'll look at the knee. Or they go, I've got back pain. So they'll look at the spine. And I would say for acute pain, is awesome. If you, for example, you sprain your ankle, you twist your knee,
Yeah.
very, very good at getting them back on their feet. And for many people, that's no problems. That it's an acute injury, and they're back on their feet, and they don't have any further issues. The problem comes to people that have chronic pain, pain that's lasted longer than 6 to 12 months, and perhaps no longer has like a definite cause.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it's now not structural. So I think the first one is the difference between acute pain and chronic pain that not a lot of people are perhaps aware of.
Yeah.
So like acute pain is where, like I think the clear example is you put your hand on like something hot and it hurts. And you take your hand away, and there's that immediate, what we call like nociception, that detection of something unpleasant that we need to move away from. And depending on what it is, you might detect it as like heat, that's then uncomfortably hot, that is then painful. And it's like a spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
Chronic pain is very different. Chronic pain, I would define anything as lasting for longer than 3 to 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And then we start to get into the nervous system where we're getting a sensation that's being repeated over and over and over again and is being interpreted by the brain as pain. And this is where I think we get into a lot of trouble. Like people then go, so you're telling me it's in my head. And they feel very personally attacked. And pain, chronic pain, is nearly always a product of the nervous system.
Mhm.
And it's nearly always an interpretation of the brain. That said, it's a very real experience. But it is often a learned response to a particular trigger.
Got it.
And so you can, for example, and I like to think it's almost like a PTSD of the muscle and the nervous system, where we can do a movement that reminds our like our limbic system, our amygdala, our hippocampus, and our brain of a movement. So, for example, if I hurt my back doing a squat, it might be a squat, it might be anything. My trunk goes slightly forwards that my brain thinks, oh, that's reminiscent to what happened when we first hurt our back, and it puts the muscles into spasm, stopping you from doing the movement, and that's what creates the pain. And that's just like a learned response.
Got it. Mhm. That makes total sense because it's a little bit like habits, right? Habits so baked in that you don't even realize you're doing them.
Exactly. So it might seem very random. So it might be, and it can be something like someone says, like, like when you first hurt your back, you might get like a doctor saying to you, oh, you need to avoid bending forwards while your back is hurting. What that becomes is don't bend forwards. Then you get very well-meaning friends and family going, oh, you shouldn't bend forwards. You shouldn't lift that because you're going to hurt your back. And it becomes this whole narrative that if I bend forwards, I'm going to hurt my back, but we don't think about it consciously. We're not thinking that what happens is the brain stores it away
Mhm.
into the subconscious, and then it plays it out like a program, so that it becomes like this narrative of if I bend forwards, something bad's going to happen. So I've got to then brace and stop this from happening. But it's so quick. It's like it's like the sympathetic coming in. It's like if you see like a grizzly bear, you don't go there and like go, wow, is that a grizzly? Now, do I sit down and run away? What type of bear is? You don't consider your options. Your first instinct is either to throw yourself on the floor and play dead or just run away.
Mhm.
You go with your first instinct. There's no rationale to what you do. It's just, and it's the same. It's the nervous system panicking and going, "Oh my God, we're gonna get hurt. So let's just stop everything from happening."
And this is why so many people get deconditioned. And then, so the thought of maybe doing weight training or some form of resistance training becomes scary because they've been told, well, don't bend the back. So you'll
Yeah,
never do a Romanian deadlift ever because.
exactly. And then I say to people, so if you're not bending forwards, or I get people that say, "Oh, my doctor said don't lift weights." So then I say to them, so then they tell me I can't lift weights. My doctor said so. So I go, so how do you pick up your handbag? How do you pick up your bags of shopping? How do you pick up your basket of laundry? And they go, oh, that's different.
Hmm.
And it becomes about context. And so we can get a whole narrative of this. If I do this, then this is going to be painful. So, for example, if we think about the spine, a lot of people associate, like, with if they have back pain, that bending forwards, like a standing forward fold, is going to be painful and potentially harmful. But if we that's a spinal flexion movement, that's a spinal flexion movement. So I then will say, okay, so, but you like lying on your back and bringing your knees into your chest. It's the same movement. Okay, it's different because it's not loaded,
Yes.
but the movement of the spine is essentially the same. Or they say, I like to go into hands and knees and do a cat stretch when I round my back to the ceiling. It's the same flexion.
Mhm.
So it's not the movement per se. And I do get that obviously with a forward fold, there is an element of loading of the trunk
Yeah.
coming. But the movement itself, if I break it down, it's not. So then all I need to do is then condition the body to load, to teach the body, the nervous system, once again, that flexion is not painful in this context.
Got it. So this is like another one that comes up for a lot of people, and I guess a lot of the women that I work with is knee pain.
Yeah.
Um, and you mentioned earlier about how the structural way we've been taught, right? If there's pain in your knee, it must be your knee. So therefore, I cannot squat or lunge. And actually, oftentimes it's something above. I call it heaven and hell. Now you're better with injuries than me, but I'm like, well, is the issue actually in heaven, which is the hips? or maybe back, or is it down in the feet, which is hell, because the knee is earth. So are we saying that people still need to start looking beyond where the pain is after it's been chronic pain?
Absolutely. And I think this is the really big thing. And I think this is where, like the more, Greg, the more specialized people become, the more narrow their focus becomes. So, I tend to think like that, like our physios and our osteos and our chiros, they're incredibly well trained specialists. And their focus is, typically on that area. And and I sometimes think we don't always ask the right questions. I was taught, my training, the questions you ask are really important. What you ask people. So with knee pain, as you mentioned, it can come from below. We call like bottom up, the feet, the
Mm-hmm.
ankles, and it can come from above, typically the pelvis and the hips. But we could go even higher and look at the ribs, the shoulders, the shoulder girdle, and potentially even the head and the neck. But I always look at the two nearest points above and below: pelvis, hips, lumbar, sacral, spine, going down to feet, ankles. And the knee is nearly always the middleman. I would say, unless, like for example, if you've fallen off a mountain, like skiing, and you've hurt your knee, it's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
But for most people, as you know, Greg, knee pain is more insidious. It often, like they'll say, well, it started a bit like this, and then it kind of got a bit worse. And then they can't pinpoint a moment when it went pop.
Yeah.
And so then I look above and below, and I was actually talking to somebody in the changing rooms, and they've had knee pain for about a year. And this is a very common conversation I'll have with people, and they were talking about knee pain they'd had for over a year, and then more recently it's gone into the hip.
Mm-hmm.
So they've been seeing a physio, and the physio's looked at them and said, "Yeah, your quad muscles are wasted. You need to strengthen your quads, do more leg presses in the gym." So they've been doing that for about 6 months, and the knee pain's still there, and the quad muscles aren't really bulking up as they would like. So then they saw a doctor, and the doctor said, "Well, it could be hip dysplasia. I think we need some X-rays." So, so she's been referred to X-rays, more waiting.
Mm-hmm.
So I stood her up, and I looked at her, and I just said to her, "Can you see on your, like, the right leg's the normal leg, and it's fine. Everything's stacked: foot, ankle, knee, hip, all stacked, all pointing the same direction, one underneath the other. Really nice. On the left leg," and I said to her, "Can you see that your foot's kind of pointing out a little bit? The hip's dead on straight, but the knee is really turning out, because the knee is going into what we call valgus. So the kneecap's turning out, but the actual knee joint is pushing inwards."
Mm-hmm.
And so her complaint is a slipping patella. Her pain is coming from the patella slipping to the outside. But I said to her, "Do you feel like your weight is not centered?" And her whole weight was shifted. It was like a tree leaning to the right.
Mm-hmm.
And I just said to her, "Have you ever had a fall and injury or surgery on this left side of your body?" And she said, "Yes, a failed bunion op." And I said, "Okay. How long ago?" She said, "2 years." And I said, "Is your foot still hurting?" She said, "Yes, very much so." And I said, "Did your knee pain predate this bunion op?" She said, "No." And so my feeling is that unless we get the foot, I don't know if it's the foot definitively, but my feeling is unless we can get her foot to the point where she's happy to stand on it and use it, and without worrying about pain. Because at the moment, "I'm so worried it's going to hurt, I don't use it at all." And I said, what I think might be happening, this is just a hypothesis until I get into the foot and I actually
Yeah.
find out. My working hypothesis is that the patella is trying to go back to where it was designed, but the knee is no longer there. The knee is going into quite a strong valgus. So the patella is trying to go back to where it was, so it's slipping. But it's trying to find the knee joint, but the knee joint's gone to the inside.
Mm.
And the hip pain, I potentially think we need to rule out hip dysplasia. We must rule it out. So the X-rays are important. But my feeling potentially is that the hip pain is manifesting through glute medius, trying through the IT band, trying to pull the kneecap out to where it's meant to be, but it's just the knee's no longer there.
This just reminds me of a client I had when I was doing more in person, not too long ago actually, and she couldn't squat without knee pain. And I was like, she said, I've been to doctors, and she was like, oh, I've got the, because she had some hip problems as well, labrum tears and stuff. And I said, okay, let's have a look. So I said, right, take off your shoes. And I got on the floor. She was like, what are you doing? And I'm like, let me sit, squat for me. So she did 2 squats. I was like, you got pain? I said, yes. All right, cool. I put my hand on her big toe to squat now. So like, she hesitated because she didn't want pain. Then she then she squatted and she was like, this is not right. There's no pain. I'm like, okay. So I pressed a bit harder. I said, let's do 5. Did 5, no pain. And exactly as you said, I said, have you ever injured this toe, fallen down the stairs? And she went, actually, when I was about 7, I was like, I fell down the stairs, I broke my toe, I hurt my ankle. And I went, there's your problem. I said, right, you're going to go home and you're going to really strengthen that foot, practice it. And I was getting messages, Greg, I'm squatting. It's because of this looking at different things rather than the one spot. But I guess it's normal because we feel pain.
Yeah.
So we think that is X marks the spot, as it were. But we forget that everything's connected.
Absolutely. And it is like, when you get like chronic pain, you're going to get compensation layering on compensation.
Mm-hmm.
So, I tend to find that it can often be like peeling away the layers of an onion. So we have to find somewhere to start. And, we were saying before, it's about the basics. For me, the basics are the feet functioning? Are they level? Are they balanced? Because that's our foundations. We can argue about the importance of the hierarchy of the pelvis versus the feet, but I always think they have to work together. Like if your feet aren't engaging with the ground as they should, you've got no foundation. The pelvis has to sit on the feet. It can't do anything but.
Mm-hmm.
And the pelvis is like the master, it's the epicenter, it's the master controller of all movement in the body. Everything runs through the pelvis and the spine. So if the pelvis isn't orientated on the hip joints, obviously then, the muscles that attach onto the pelvis and the spine aren't going to be functioning correctly. Nearly all of our muscles will connect to the spine in some way, directly or indirectly. So we have an immediate channel to all the other parts of the body. So I kind of think, like you have to look at the pelvis and the feet together. When I was very early trained, we were taught top down, bottom up, but I think it's a both approach. You've got to have both. So I always look at people. I always like the basics for me are: can someone engage the ground with their feet are their feet level in balance? Are they utilizing the feet to then stack the ankle, knee, and the hip? And then can they feel their pelvis in space? Do they have a choice over where their pelvis sits? Like can they move the pelvis forwards? Can they move it backwards? Can they feel where the pelvis is? Can they tell me, yes, I'm going forwards, now I'm tilting backwards, now I can feel I'm in the center? And like for everybody, center's different. Center, like your neutral isn't like for me a set place. Your neutral in different contexts might be different positions. But I always think, you want to have a choice. Can I feel where my pelvis is? Do I want it there? Do I not want it there? And if I don't want it there, can I move it? And I think a lot of people, it's unconscious. They don't know where their pelvis is, so they have no way of changing it.
Mm.
And that's what then causes the problems.
So there's no connection with the body, basically. They haven't got an awareness of how it should feel.
No, and I think, when you've been in chronic pain, you get a very skewed mind map.
Mm-hmm.
Like what, like you'll not probably see, people will swear to you they're straight. Like you'll say to them, you're crooked. And or you shift your weight over on you can see like they're leaning to one side,
Yeah.
and you'll tell them straighten up, and you'll straighten them up, and
And
you'll say to them, you don't think you're straight, and they go, oh, I'm crooked. I say, no, you stay right where you are straight. And their whole brain has become like, like if you're so used to like leaning over to one side or your shoulders are down, like it becomes normal. And your brain goes, well, that's normal. So then you get someone's correct and they go, not straight.
mm-hmm.
And you kind of have to tell them, so when you feel you're straight, correct yourself to I put you where you weren't straight.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of and then after a few like more repetition, their brain starts to go, oh, okay. And then it starts to feel the difference.
And you just said a word that I love so much, repetition.
Absolutely.
Because that's a fundamental challenge when it comes to pain management, improvement in anything. repetition, repetition, repetition. And I think that sometimes why people don't necessarily get the release from pain they want because they haven't put enough reps in.
Absolutely. And I think there's two principles. I think the less is more,
Mhm.
and the repetition and the basics. I'm a real one for repeating the basics over and over. And even when you get to be a master, you know, of your body, it's always the basics that make the difference. So I'm a big one for repeat, repeat. And when we're talking about like what I do, which is basically posh word is neural repatterning, the brain learns by repetition. How we learn to ride a bicycle is repetition. How we learn to do any skill, play an instrument, repetition. Like play golf, repetition. Everything the brain does, what the brain does frequently, it does well. So if we want to program the brain to do something, we have to optimize our patterns. So this is why telling someone to strengthen their quads while their foot isn't functioning, you're just repeating a movement pattern that's causing pain. You're
Mhm.
not changing. So you look at, okay, so we repeat the basics. If it's only changing the foot position, and I don't worry about the pelvis for now, I change the foot position. I repeat, I repeat, I repeat, and then I can get that. Then I can go on to something else. It's like with training, isn't it, Greg? You don't want to like give someone this amazing program that's so complicated. It looks fantastic, and like it looks like amazing, this amazing sequence, but actually it's so complicated that they're just completely lost and befuddled.
Yeah. But people want complicated, right? They want to see something different. Like you said with the training program, I'm like 5 to 6 exercises tops. They're like,
Yeah.
is that all? I'm like, yeah.
And as well, people are time poor. It's like if I want someone to master something, if I want someone to master something, if I want someone to master their foot position, I'm going to give them one or two exercises that I think are going to make the most difference. If I want someone to master how they feel their pelvis, I might give them one or two, maybe three, just to master that, so they can instead of spending 10 minutes doing six exercises and then only spending a minute and a half on each exercise, if I give them 10 minutes and say we do two exercises,
Mhm.
that's 5 minutes and a break. So they can have a break. And I think people, like someone said to me, one of my clients said to me, who knew moving could be so hard? And they barely move. And I think a lot of people think that they've got to do more. They've got to like do this bigger, make this hurt more, like, oh, that's too simple. It's not going to work. I've got to do this and then I've got to do that. And it's not, it's simple.
Love it. Love it. It's funny because I have a background in Chinese martial arts. So my teacher used to just drill us on certain moves. So when I can do it now, people are like, but Greg, you haven't done Kung Fu properly for like 10, 15 years. I'm like, that's because I was drilled on how to do it, as you said. So I've got a question about core training.
Yeah.
This is a big bugbear in the kind of fitness side and also in the restorative side. And people have a perception of core strength. How do you describe the core strength to people?
Okay, so this is where I'm a Pilates teacher as well, and this is where I burn Pilates myths. I will literally
I'm
torch them.
here for it. I'm here for it.
So I believe core strength and core stability are two different things. I think in terms of everything we do, we must be stable.
Yeah,
Like for me, stability is at the cornerstone of everything. You can't Stability and mobility are two sides of the coin. You can't be mobile if you're not stable, and you can't be stable if you're not mobile.
got
But
it.
I don't, we must recognize that core strength is something else.
Mhm.
It's like you can have a lot of core strength and still not be stable.
Got it.
So for example, I get a lot of people saying my core's weak. Well, I'm looking at them and I'm thinking, well, you're standing up, right? You're holding yourselves up against gravity. This is no mean feat. Your core is doing just fine as it is. You know, could it be stronger? Well, what do you want to do with it? If you want to go and do Olympic lifting, yes, maybe we make it stronger. But making it stronger isn't going to give you more stability. That comes down to alignment and stacking and awareness and control. So in terms of like if we say about back pain, people say, "Oh, I need to make more core stronger." Okay, so you're gonna get stronger, but if you don't have the awareness and the control of that strength, where's it going? and what do you want to make stronger exactly? But I think also as well, when we think about pain, chronic pain comes often from muscles tensing,
Yes.
muscles bracing. That's often the pain that we feel. So if my muscles are tense and braced, when I train people with back pain, nearly all of them, not one of them has needed a stronger core. Most of them needed to be told, can you relax, please, and chill out a little bit more. So if we think about bracing the core, typically when I want to brace my core, it's for something like I'm going to fall, so I need to brace for impact,
Hmm.
or I'm doing something like maybe I've got a really heavy loaded barbell squat, barbell on my back, and I need to brace to stop my spine from being compressed and squashed, or I'm doing a clean and press. Then I need to brace my core, absolutely. But for everyday movement, when I'm moving through my day, when I'm just going about my everyday job, my everyday routine, I don't need to brace. I need to move. And if I brace my core, I stop everything in my midsection moving. And then if I stop everything in my midsection, my hips stop rotating, my ribs stop rotating, my shoulders, my neck don't rotate. And if we think about walking and running, they're rotational patterns.
Hmm. Yep.
So if I'm stopping everything from rotating and everything from moving, I'm essentially putting myself in a full body cast,
Mm.
and I'm stop and this is why I find that, you know, a lot of people are saying, oh, I need to make my core stronger. No, stability is one thing, strength is another. Let's not get them confused.
Yes. I love it. Yeah, I think there's this people like, especially the plank is the god exercise of core strength. It's like, well, I can do a plank for 3 minutes kind of thing. And I'm like, okay, when in real life do you ever have to brace for 3 minutes? Like, don't get me wrong, it has an application, but it seems like it's the go-to for most people, probably just because it's being popularized, etc.
Absolutely. I mean, it's still there. I still get people saying to me, I've been told my core's weak. I've been told that I've got back pain, so I need to make my core stronger. And so for example, you talked about the plank. I could do like a forearm plank, so hover on elbows, elbows under shoulders, on my toes, full forearm plank. Well, never going to be repeated again, but just for a bit of a giggle, we did like a forearm plank challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was like a bit of a competition between like the instructors and the trainers. And I managed 17 and a half minutes in full hover.
Wow.
So, you could say that my core is probably stronger than average at that time.
Mm-hmm.
But my back pain at that time was also at its worst. So my core strength, like being able to hold a forearm plank for 17 and a half minutes counted for nothing with managing my back pain. I still had back pain every day. How strong did I need my core to be before I got rid of my back pain? And if this was really the answer, I could just send everybody with back pain on a 12-week core strengthening course. I'd magically wave a wand and their back pain would go away because their cores would be amazingly strong. They'd never come back to me ever again, and they'd all be fine.
And that doesn't happen.
It does not happen. So my question is, how strong do you need to make your core before your back pain goes away? How, and
And even then, that's strength endurance, not actual strength. And these, maybe it's because these terms aren't well explained to the general public. They just see strength as duration, not the ability to move force or to resist force, you know?
exactly. And I think as well, I don't. One thing I wish therapists would stop saying if you've got a weak muscle. It's not very empowering to somebody. Like somebody's already in pain. They're already probably by the time they see a therapist worried enough because as we know, people don't do anything unless they're really prompted. So by the time they actually seek help, they're probably concerned enough about their well-being, and then to be told, well, like you've got a really weak glute, that's worrying. Then you're going, oh my God, my body's really weak. And it's very disempowering to somebody to say you've got like a weak muscle.
Mhm.
And to be honest, that's not really, I don't find that that's often the case. Typically, the weak muscle for a lot of people is a fatigued muscle. And it's fatigued because it's working at an involuntary level that they can't feel. So if you do like a maximal voluntary contraction test, it comes off as weak. What they can feel is the voluntary contraction. That's the one they can tap into. But it's smaller because there's an involuntary contraction that's already there that isn't, if it's already there, it's not part of an MVC test. So the test is flawed, the sensation is flawed, the whole result is flawed.
Yeah, the weak muscle argument comes up so much. We've got a weak glute, or no, what's the classic one is your glutes don't fire.
Yeah.
I'm like, what do you mean? I can't see smoke. Like, what does that mean? Like, I wanna understand it. I'm like, okay, can you squat? Can you glute bridge? Yes. Okay, so what do you mean they're not firing? But like you said, they might be fatigued rather than weak, or the person hasn't got the right movement patterns to engage the muscle fully. That.
Yeah, and as well, like if we think about something like sensory motor amnesia, they often can't feel it. So, like the brain only has so much headspace. So, for example, if they're using, say, a 10% contraction of the glutes to stabilize their pelvis or their lumbar sacral spine for whatever reason, the glute isn't really meant to perform that function as such. So if that glute is just on all the time, the brain's just going to go, you want to just leave it to it. I'm not going to register this anymore. I'm just going to, it's like someone talks all the time and never ever stops. You end up just tuning them out. It's like, or the radio on in the background, you just tune it out and the brain stops listening. So they may not even know feel their glutes on, like they'll feel nothing, but the glue is actually firing. And I think people sometimes think that glutes do more than they do. I think people think they get like fireworks, when the glutes, and they're a very understated muscle. I do like a really nice one where I get people to like, I like to get them to line their tummies and I get them just to move their feet in and out and just like swivel the leg and just change the angle of the hip joint from internal external rotation. Just see if they can feel the tone of the glutes changing. And they're always surprised at how subtle it is. Like they don't need to clench, you don't need to clench your buttocks under normal circumstances. That's way, way much. And the glutes are just very, you can actually feel the tone change and they're on and they're off, but it's not like, oh my God, it's seismic. I'm like, everything's clenching and squeezing and rising. They don't do that. That's way much. I mean, if I was doing like Usain Bolt sprinting, they might do that. But under a normal circumstance, if I was really, really if I was proper going for it with a squat, and I was maybe doing like real, concentric squats, like really dry, they might do that. But under normal circumstances, they don't do a lot. They're not a muscle that's like there's not like fireworks and explosions and like, hello, I've arrived.
I just had the phrase that comes to my mind is like people are looking for a glute orgasm. That's the only way I can describe. It's like they're looking
And
for
it's really not. I mean, they're just a very, like they're just a very understated muscle. They just work in the background, incredibly powerful muscle, but they're not like the hamstrings are a much noisier neighbor. The hamstrings whinge. And a lot of people say, oh, my hamstrings are really tight. And again, I'm always saying, yes, but no muscle wakes up one day and goes, I'm going to be tight, I'm going to be weak. They just don't. All that is a sensation. Like one of my mentors, Simon Wellstead, he would say he really dislikes these labels of tight and weak and strong, and he's just, it's all muscle behavior. It's the muscle telling you it's doing something. Is it meant to be doing that? Is it not meant to be doing that? Is that a normal sensation? Is it a sensation telling you that there's something, it's doing something it wasn't designed? And so this is what we just look at.
I think, and I was going to go back to the glute thing because obviously there's a big rise in people doing lots of glute work, especially women, because they want a nice backside. And I watch people doing this thing when they stand up and they squat and they're really like forcing their pelvis forward to squeeze the glutes. I'm like, or they're doing so many hip thrusts. They're almost like I watched a girl in the gym the other day, and the way she was walking, I was like, is she okay? Like no, but she looked like a robot. But that's because I think her glute, her like hips had because she does so many hip thrusts, she's actually put herself in an abnormal position. That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, so is she almost in like that lordotic sway back?
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
her glutes are stuck out, and you know, stomach sticking out almost, and you're just like, and so her walking, she was like a penguin. I was like, that's not good. She got good, great glutes, but she couldn't move properly. It was like, uh. So is that becoming something you're seeing more of late, or is that not coming to your what as much?
Um, Probably not to me as much because by the time they get to me, they're pretty far down the line.
Right.
But I think that's training and imbalance. So, if like I don't like to say that posture is that there's no evidence that posture is in itself a cause of pain. But I think any posture to an if you the trouble is if you get stuck in a posture, like for example, like if this girl can't get out of that sway back, lordotic, bum out, tummy out type posture, then your muscles get stuck there. You're like repetitively training them into that state and you're never really letting them go. I was kind of saying it's like the difference between like, if we can squat for longer than a wall sit. You can if you had a bit, if you have a fair amount of strength endurance, you can squat up and down for a few minutes
Mm-hmm.
without fatiguing. I would say, sustainable I teach body pump, which is a weights class. We might squat with a fairly light to moderate barbell for about 5.5, 6 minutes, just starting to approach fatigue. But if I were to put you in a wall sit and left you there, you know, you a
Screaming
minute,
anyway.
2 minutes,
Yeah.
after 3 minutes, you are probably going to kill me. Like that's your legs is so it's and the muscles get stuck in this sort of pattern, and this is the beginning of really chronic pain because the muscles just get stuck in this pattern and they don't ever come out of that, so they don't ever get a chance to relax out of that pattern.
Got it. And I think there's also this thing about muscle confusion. Like this needs to stop as well. Like muscles don't get confused. They kind of
Well,
have a couple of jobs, I guess, but they're not confused about what they have to do. They do based on the environment they've got, right?
yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to recognize that muscles don't have a brain and they cannot think for themselves. You know, we are the ones that have a brain, and it's the brain is the flight control center. So, it's like, and I think as well, like going right back to, like saying about, like therapists. And I think, with the way with therapists, they're trying to change structure at the level of the joint or the muscle. So they're trying to either change the way the bones meet,
Mm-hmm.
or they're trying to change the physiological state of the muscle with like massage or shockwave or ultrasound or whatever. But the high, but so muscles move joints, but
Mm-hmm.
what controls a muscle ultimately is the central nervous system and the brain. And as you mentioned, they're always responding to environment, external, internal. So if we really want to get out, if we really want to change the way the muscles are behaving, if they're staying in contraction or if they're not contracting as we want them to, then it's not. We have to go beyond the joint and the muscle. We have to go into the nervous system and the brain, and ultimately change, repattern them, which then alters muscle behavior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's the only way you're going to change how the body really functions.
So and this you just brought up a very beautiful point about environment. So obviously me and you met through a mentor of ours, Cliff Wild, and we did a lot of stuff on helping people to actually look at health more holistically. And I think what happens is, like you said, we get so focused on that individual joint, we forget all of these other things that are happening with sleep, stress, what you eat, how you live, all have an impact on the brain and thus the nervous system, thus, you know, how your body has responded to injuries, etc.
Absolutely, and certainly when you're looking at chronic pain, I mean, I would describe chronic pain as a neuroimmunophysiological phenomenon. That there is elements of neurology, the brain, the central nervous system. Obviously, the brain is always taking in inputs from the external environment, from the internal environment. Then we have the immune system. We have to think about inflammation. We have to think about how the cells themselves are functioning. If we're talking about somebody being in a level of involuntary muscle contraction, if that muscle is, always active, even if it's only 5 or 10%, it's consuming energy. Muscle produces contraction, through glycogen, which then, as a byproduct, is lactate, which then needs to be flushed out. So then we go into that. And as well, I think what is the elephant in the room is people, like, like with especially with a long term injury, like, for example, you have a very serious knee injury, like, an ACL or something that's a real long term injury.
Mhm.
There is definitely a there is definitely a psychological element where when you lose function, you can lose the person that you were
Yep.
pre-injury. So I think that, there's always going to be an element that we have to think, there's an element of loss and grief involved with chronic pain that, again, changes neurotransmitters, changes hormone levels, changes, and all of that feeds into how we feel pain, how we perceive pain, how we just perceive our bodies. If we're feeling a little bit down, every sensation that's negative becomes amplified.
Yep. For sure. I remember when I tore my Achilles tendon and I thought, and the doctor said to me, Greg, you're never going to be able to squat again. For about 2 months, that changed. I know it changed how my injury healed until I kind of went, hang on a minute, let's go and prove this doctor wrong. I no, hold on, what's he talking about? I know I can do this. But I think you're right. And I think one of the big underrated parts of all of this is sleep. And as we were talking about right before the kind of the show kicked off, we were talking about sleep and how important it is.
Absolutely. And there was, I think I wrote, I think I wrote in my blog, there was a really interesting research article, that looked at the relationship between chronic pain and sleep. And it showed that, not surprising, I don't think this was any sort of surprise, but there was a relationship between chronic pain and sleep, in that people with chronic pain had less restorative deep sleep
Mm-hmm.
and had less, like worse quality sleep. But also, people that had poor sleep patterns tended to have a higher association with chronic pain. So it works both ways. And certainly, I think, like, obviously, we know that when you don't have enough sleep, you get into the levels of neuroinflammation. Like, the brain can't detox as it needs to in the deeper stages of sleep. So then, if the brain is in, if there's in sort of pro-inflammatory sort of proteins circulating around the brain, substance P is a neuropeptide that's a really big one in chronic pain. Substance P, produced by the spinal neurons, is being implicated more and more in lots of cases of chronic pain. So chronic pain syndrome, fibromyalgia, multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, it's coming up in more and more and more, to some degree osteoarthritis as well. So I think, like, sleep is so important. I think sleep changes mood. We know, again, it's no great rocket science, that when you're tired, when you're, a bit stressed, if you stub your toe, it's like the worst thing in the world. It's like the
It's always
world
the
has
worst.
ended. Like, my
No, no,
toe
no,
is
no, no.
broken.
It's
I'm
always the
never going to
worst
walk
thing. When
again.
you kick your foot against the edge of the bed, that is the worst pain on earth.
Oh my God. And if you had like a really crap night's sleep, it's
Yep.
like, oh my God, my foot's broken, my toe, I'm never gonna use my, and it's like if you, like, say for example, you'd won the lottery and you just found out, it would be like, oh yeah, whatever. I think mood and, our sleep, general health is really underestimated in chronic pain, and like, people just think it's a musculoskeletal issue, but it is. And when we get into the world of chronic pain, it is about immune system, it is about physiology, and we know that sleep underpins immune system and physiology.
So everyone listening, get your sleep sorted ASAP. Um, I want to leave the podcast with, like, I think back. I'm trying to think if back pain is the worst, probably the most popular pain that people have right now. And I know you can't give a very specific diagnosis of everybody back pain who listens to this, but Have you got some recommendations that people can start to do differently, or speak to their physio or whoever's helping them? What can they do differently to make sure they have maybe less back pain?
So for me with back pain, the main thing is to recognize with back pain is typically the worst pain comes when the muscles go into spasm. Yeah, anyone who's ever had back muscle, spasm will know that it literally floors you. Some people describe it as one of the worst pains in the world. I mean, if the back muscles really go into spasm, you're on the floor. There's nothing more. I would always say that when like less is more. The exercise that I still use now, and it's one of my foundational exercises, is where we do an exercise called arch and flatten, where it's nominally like a pelvic tilt, but we go into the tension in order to make the brain aware of the tension and then release it. So you would, if you can get on the floor and lie on your back with your knees bent, do that. But if you can't get on the floor, you can do it seated, you can do it in bed, you can do it even in 4-point kneeling. Some people are sometimes more comfortable on their hands and knees with back pain, oddly enough. And you would first of all think about the lower back muscles and really think about them in your mind. And once you're thinking about them, then start to think about contracting them. So you might feel your lower back arching, but if movement is too painful, it's enough just to think about contracting them, because the brain, it just activates the sensory motor cortex. Once you are feeling whether you're actually feeling the muscles contract, whether your brain is just sensing that, then you're going to ask them to relax and try and get the tension down as close to zero as possible. Okay, but without forcing it, because obviously if we're in a level of spasm, we're not going to zero, but
Yeah.
as much as we can. Allow yourself to rest and relax there for at least 30 seconds to a minute.
Mhm.
And then we would go into what would normally be a posterior pelvic tilt, where we think about the tummy muscles in between the pelvis and the ribs, contract them to bring the pelvis and the ribs close. It's almost like the world's tiniest ever abdominal crunch.
Yep.
Contracting the tummy muscles and then slowly relaxing them. And
Mhm.
again, trying to feel the muscles coming back to zero, and the back and the front of the body becoming equal. Again, resting for 30 seconds to a minute and just doing that 2 or 3 times to each side. But again, the movement itself isn't important. It's more the thinking about the contracting of the muscle
Mhm.
and the thinking about relaxing the muscle that then gets the brain in control of the muscle again. And once the brain is aware of the tension,
Mhm.
it can then start to take back control and start to turn it down.
Love it. Love it. Yeah. And I was just practicing it as you were talking me through it. I was just like, yeah, let me just practice that. So that's an awesome um, way to start, especially if you're in a lot of pain, you've got spasms. Spasms are the worst thing ever.
Absolutely. And, this is the exercise that is one of my foundational ones. I say it's the one that I still use, going back to, like the basics. If I feel that my back is a little bit niggly, maybe I can feel my nervous system is a little bit dysregulated. That can change the state of the muscles.
Mhm.
Talking about fight or flight, stress, anxious, change the state of the muscles. Then I just do that, minute or two, a little bit of arch and flatten, and then just crack on, because it just allows my brain to go, oh yeah, we're holding a bit more tension now. Okay, recognize that, let it go. And I say it's about repetition. The more you repeat, the more the brain recognizes and the more sensitive the brain becomes without fixating.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Norma, this has been awesome. Your knowledge is flawless. You dropped some words that I couldn't even remember. I was like, um, so where can people reach out to find more about your work and what you do? Because I know you have an awesome newsletter as well. So where can people find you?
Yeah, so I'm on Facebook at Norma Pearson Fitness.
Mhm.
The best thing is to connect with me on Facebook. I'm also on Instagram at Norma Pearson Fitness again. If you click on my profile picture on Facebook, on the banner at the top, there's
Mhm.
a link to subscribe to my newsletter, which is the Movement Chronicle. Comes out every Monday at 7 a.m. straight into your inbox, so you don't need to worry about algorithms and Facebook and everything. And so the newsletter in itself is just a bite-sized nugget, a truth bomb, and insight into pain relief and movement. And then there's a link to a blog if you wanted to go into a little bit more detail into that topic of the newsletter.
Awesome. So ladies and gents, I know there's a few gentlemen that listen to my podcast. Go and check Norma's content. I will make sure it's all in the show notes for everybody. Norma, thank you for bringing your knowledge, and you are awesome. I love your content, but that's just just that's me fanboying on you. Um, but yeah, I hope so. I hope people reach out and get some real help because these problems will hold them back in many parts of their life, and people, we want them to move freely and happily, and then they can come to me and squat. So if you listen to this and you've got some value, share this with a friend or family, give us a review, and we'll see you on the next episode. Bye for now.